My day job is as what we call a cardiac sonographer. Sounds super fancy, it's not. We just take pictures. And it's not our problem what happens because we pass it to the doctors. So don't get fooled by the title, it's just a lot of letters. But I figured out, I was doing some maths before. I've been doing it for about 8 years now. I did some maths and I've seen 17,000 patients at least. So I was like, that's a lot of people to encounter. And for a long time, I've noticed something about a lot of our patients. The demographic, as you can probably appreciate being in a hospital, is normally of the elderly variety. And we see two different types of people within that. Kind of think of it as like that, you know that ad, and maybe I'm starting to show my age these days because this was on free-to-air TV, but it's that ad where it's like there's the two people on the escalator going down, and it's like they're like same income, like same job, whatever, you know that one? But then it's like different supers, and it's like Q super, maybe I'll get paid for that, I don't know, but nah. And so they've got this so everything's exactly the same, but one's got way more money because they're in this different super. And that's kind of what we see a lot with the people at work. We get these elderly people and they come in and we have one group. They come in and the best way to put it is they are quite bitter and angry people. They, for whatever reason, just kind of have an air of saltiness about them that they express when they come into the room. And it's tough and it hurts to see. And let's say it's Betty and she's 80 years old and she leaves and then we go out and we get the next patient and we bring in Mary, because that's another old person's name. Sorry for any young Marys here. I apologise in advance. So Mary, she's 80. And you know what? She can have the exact same story and the exact same experiences through life in her 80 years, but she is full of joy. And she walks in the room and she lights the room up and you can feel the difference. And it's something I always think there and I'm just like, man, that is so fascinating. Like that we can just have two people with very similar circumstances walk through life and be at such different ends of a spectrum. And I think it really shows the effect that a mindset can have in forming you over such a long period of time. And it can really change and become who you are. So I think the person that's quite bitter is a victim of what I think is quite a pandemic in society at the moment, which is this bitterness pandemic. I think it creates a lot of issues in this world. And what we have is we have a tension between people that's created by this kind of negative outlook on how they see everything. Because they're bitter, every experience that they walk through is this negative connotation. They can't see anything good out of it. And it makes it really tough to have any positive kind of feelings towards the experiences and the situations you're going through. And the issue with it is, I think that the world kind of celebrates the bitterness in a way. Like I think we really lean into that and they kind of encourage it and they want us to almost take on this persona of bitterness. I mean, you've only got to look at kind of media outlets and the fact that we have people dedicated to kind of picking out the negative in things and getting people to feed on the negative views of the different things that are going on in the world. And media outlets they're pretty smart. They give people what they want. So if they're giving people things to be bitter about, I think it's because the world wants something to be bitter about. So they lean into that. I think of, so there might Parks and Rec fans out here at all, and like good Parks and Rec, maybe showing my age again, because it's been around 15 years. But anyway, there is this character on there called Ron Swanson. You might have seen a meme or two about him. And his whole persona is just negative and really bitter and really kind of like angry towards everything. And I'm not gonna lie, when I was watching, I was like, that guy's pretty cool. But you start to come to this realization that it's like, man, this guy has no joy in his life because just everything he looks at is so bitter and he's just so angry about it. Like he's missing out on so much. So what I want to do is I want to kind of take a bit of a look at bitterness, but I also want to take a look at the other end of the spectrum, which is joy. So I think that's really important tonight. So what is bitterness? And I think the best way to define it would be it's intensity of suffering of mind and body, something that is difficult to bear, something that causes animosity and reaction, something that is brought about by hatred or antagonism. And I think we can have two different strands of antagonism that can create this animosity and reaction within us. The two I want to look at are we can have passive experiences of bitterness and we can have active experiences of bitterness. What I mean when I say active kind of experiences of bitterness is they're quite obvious ones. So it's where someone is actually doing something to you to harm you, like to create a reaction out of you, to make you angry, to make you frustrated. So things like someone treating you poorly maybe for your financial status, for your relational status, or for your social status. And I think they're really obvious and they're quite easy to recognize to a degree because you start to feel it well up inside you pretty quickly. But the really dangerous one I think exists is what I'm going to call passive bitterness. This is Josh, like Psychology 101. There's probably no research into this, so don't put too much on it. But it is basically where we stand back and we see others live life, and then we get angry and frustrated and react to how they're living life because of the gap between where their lives are and where our lives are. So, examples of that is maybe someone getting a job that you really wanted, someone having a nicer car, a nicer house than the one that you have, someone having a relationship that you wish you had, someone having kids that you wish you had, someone's life appearing easier than yours, maybe a family that doesn't appear fragmented and disjointed, someone that goes through life without having any serious illness or struggle, that just seems to cruise through and just have it good. Now, it's perfectly human to have a bitter emotional reaction to these things in the moment, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't feel that, so please hear me there. But what the problem is it's when we have these emotions again and again over a long period of time, and they actually accumulate up within us. Because what happens is we will have bitterness as a feeling. We are humans. But when we don't reconcile our bitterness and have it again and again, bitterness actually becomes our state of being. It becomes the lens that we view everything in the world through. So, maybe you found yourself becoming increasingly bitter in life, or maybe you found yourself deprived of joy in your life. Circumstances are piling up, they're accumulating, and life's just become the title of tonight's message, which is pretty good, Bittersweet Symphony. I actually looked up the band that wrote that song and I can't remember it. So they were definitely, what's that, like one and done type thing? That's me too. Thanks, Levi. Oh, it's been good. Oh, it's not what you said. All right. What's what I heard? Nah. All right. I think something to remember here too is it's not always something big. It can just be a bunch of little things that happen over time. And they kind of just creep up and they bubble. And then they get to the surface and then you kind of end up in that same bitterness thing. But what I want to do is I want to look in to Naomi, which is in the book of Ruth. I want to have a look at her story. She has some pretty big experiences that I think understandably can create bitterness, which we'll see. Now there's a couple of big words which I have practiced, but I have a speech impediment using English, so the Hebrew words aren't my friend, so I apologize in advance. So Ruth 1:1-5. In the days when the judges governed Israel, there was a famine in the land of Canaan. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live temporarily in the country of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and stayed there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left a widow with her 2 sons. They took wives from the Moabite woman. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. I'm going to skip a few passages. Basically what happens here is Naomi tells her daughters-in-law to leave. So Orpah, who I keep thinking is Oprah, but it's not, goes. And the other Ruth, she actually stays. And they kind of decide that they're going to leave the land and head back to where they originated from, Bethlehem. So Ruth 1:19-21. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city was stirred because of them. And the women asked, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, meaning sweetness. Call me Mara, meaning bitter. For the Almighty has caused me great grief and bitterness. I left full with a husband and 2 sons, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" She has not pulled any punches there, has she? But it's tough to not look at Naomi and sympathize with her circumstance. You lose your husband and you lose your 2 sons, and you're in a foreign land in the midst of this massive drought, and you're left with nothing. And I couldn't imagine what it is like to be Naomi. But I think I can appreciate some of the feelings that she has and had. I've never talked about this before, so we'll see how this goes. So just buckle in and just do the journey with me. But I was kind of preparing this message tonight, and when I was talking to Geordie about it, he's like, I was like, I think I'll talk about business. He's like, "You experienced business?" I was like, "Oh, not really, man. I think I've had business in my life." And then 2 seconds later, I was like, "Oh, no, actually, that's my whole life." So basically, my backstory is when I was 3 years old, my dad was killed. And it was just me and mum at home. And it's one of those things that you don't think it takes a toll when you're young. But what actually happened was, all through my childhood, I just kept having these moments of bitterness. The first time I went to school and I got to see all the other kids getting their parents dropped off with their mum and their dad, and it was just my mum there. All the times you go to sport and there's a dad steering on the sideline, or they're coaching the teams, and it's just you alone sitting in a car park. Like all those big moments, like when you graduate, when you leave home and you're left, and it's like there's just this space. And what happened over time was I wasn't reconciling these moments. It's okay to feel that bitterness in that time, but I never took the time to acknowledge them. And so by the time I left school, I just had this bitterness just kind of well up inside me from always looking what others had and looking at the gap between what they had and what I had, and feeling bitter and getting animosity around it. And, you know, for a while I was like, just one of those things, I can live life, it'll be fine. But it got to the point where I was just getting bitter about every single thing. Like, I was just so bitter that all I was trying to do was tear other people down, because my bitterness was like so entrenched that I didn't want anyone else to feel any joy, and I just wanted them to feel bitter. I wanted them to feel like me, to experience the feeling that I had. And I was sitting at work one day, and one of my work colleagues, they said to me, they said, "You know, Josh, for a Christian, you're pretty bitter, hey?" Like, how's that for a call out? And I was pretty filthy. So I got them fired. Nah, I didn't. Nah, they hung around. But man, it was like, it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. Because it really made me take stock and actually look at my life. And just the first realization I came to was, man, how much joy am I missing out on? Like, every experience I'm just trying to make bitter. Like, there is so much good to be had. There's so much joy to experience in the day to day, and I'm depriving myself of all of that. And what I also hadn't realized was I actually got to a point where my bitterness was so entrenched that it was entrenched in my faith, and then I actually was bitter towards God. I was bitter towards God for him putting me in the circumstances that I had ended up in, without the understanding that God didn't put me in those circumstances. And so it actually was affecting my faith, my relationship with God, because I was just so angry and bitter towards him. And there's this C.S. Lewis quote, which I think is just beautiful. And it said, "God, who foresaw your tribulation, has specially armed you to go through it, not without pain, but without stain." I have done a nice little rephrase for one day when I write my own book. So the J.C. Staines rephrase of this for bitterness. J.C. Staines, that's got a nice ring to it, write that down. It says, "God, who knows that life will bring bitter moments, has equipped us to navigate through bitterness, not without experiencing the feeling, but without it becoming the root of who we are. It is inevitable, if we let bitterness become the root of who we are, that it will take away all the sweetness and joy of life." And that's not what God's will for us is. God created us to experience joy and live life to the fullest. Because much like our bitterness can become a state of being, joy can also be that state of being. That it can become the lens which we can view the experience of life with and experience joy at all times. And this is what I love about Naomi's story. So at the end of it, Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth, she's been blessed with a child. And in Ruth 4:16-17, it says this: "Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, 'Naomi has a son.' And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." There's something really important to pick up on here, I think. When we look back at chapter 1, we see Naomi say, "Do not call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara." And at the end of the book of Ruth, we see people saying Naomi has a son. Joy has returned back to her life. She no longer identifies as someone that is bitter. She identifies as someone that has joy again. And I think that is something we can all take on board, that bitterness is not a permanent thing. That is not something that has to stay in our lives forever, but actually through God and the gift of life that he brings, we can experience joy and not carry the bitterness with us. So what I want to do is I've got two thoughts. And these are basically around how we can work ourselves out of a state of bitterness if we're there, but also how we can keep ourselves to ensure that bitterness doesn't become something that can consume us. The first one is practice kindness. The best antidote sometimes to something is doing the complete opposite. So if you're just trying to be bitter all the time, let's try and be kind all the time. Let's just throw everything at it. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength." So, how do we have a cheerful heart, and how do we express kindness? Well, I think we need to create rhythms in our life that give us opportunity to be kind to others. I think the best way to do that, and the way for me, was to start serving at church. It was a time that I could come beside others, and to be honest, I was probably pretty bitter when I started serving, but there was a point where everyone around me was so kind and was so loving that I was like, I actually don't have a choice here. Like, I'm really sticking out like a sore thumb, so I better start being kind. And it actually became this like antidote to my soul. It started to break down that bitterness that had consumed me and allow me to experience that little bit of joy and get a taste of what that was like. And I think the second thing we can do is observe and practice joy. What I think can happen is that when we're bitter and we're in a state of bitterness, we can actually just forget to stop seeking joy. We forget that God's goodness and God's mercy is always so close. But we just forget to look up and try and find it. And, you know, recently, my family, we experienced some unexpected kind of grief. And it was really hard not to feel bitter. And there was a lot of moments where I was just lacking a lot of joy. And I was constantly reminded that I just needed to look up and that there was joy to be had that was so close. I started by every morning when I woke up, I was just thankful that I had breath in my lungs. Because sometimes I think we forget to appreciate that the miracle of life in its first place, so much has to go right to even get there. Man, what a joy. There was a joy when you're waiting in the shopping line and like a little baby smiles at you. Nothing makes you feel better than when a baby smiles at you. You're like, man, I must be pretty cool if a baby's smiling at me. Like, it is one of my life highlights. I don't know if that means I've got a low bar, but to me, it's huge. I'm like, oh, I have made it. But it's the joy in the smile. It's the joy in seeing someone just being compassionate to someone else, seeing someone shout someone a coffee, seeing someone just do something nice out of the ordinary. There's so much joy to be found. We just stop looking for it. But these two things are really good and they really help. But I think it's important to realize that all this is actually a bit of a pointless endeavor without God. Romans 12:2. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. My job, obviously, we look at hearts, and basically there's this condition, it's extremely rare, but it pops up every now and then. And it's what we call pericardial calcification. So it's a bit of a science lesson for the next 2 minutes, but stay with me. It's going somewhere. And what it is we have a heart, most of us, hopefully. And then around the outside of that, we just have this little bit of a fluid sac. That's called your pericardium. And what happens is sometimes we can get a bit of an infection and it gets inflamed and it fills up with fluid. What can happen if that doesn't go treated and that infection sits there for a while is that fluid actually starts to harden and it kind of creates this kind of brittle, also this really hard calcified surrounding around our heart. And it stops our heart from working properly because it can't expand and it can't beat like it should and feel like it should. And I think that's actually a pretty good little insight into what bitterness is. We get a bitter feeling and it inflames our heart. We get another bitter feeling and it inflames our heart. And before long, we haven't taken any medicine, and our heart is hard, and it's calcified, and it's not beating properly. And practicing kindness, observing and practicing joy, these things will chip away, and they will start to make indents into the calcification. But the only way that we can fully heal from a hardened heart is through the transformational power of God. And there is no other way than through the great physician that we can experience pure joy that is brought from the face of pure bitterness. So we can do all the other stuff, but if we don't let God come into our hearts, to work in our hearts, to transform our hearts, then all it will be is a small moral correction back towards being a little bit nicer. But that is not what we are here for. We are here to experience joy in the full, because that is what God has designed us to do. So, I've got some questions. Do you have space in your life to be able to practice kindness to others? Is your life so insular that it doesn't actually give you the opportunity to interact with others to be able to do that? Because if it is, we're going to have to make some changes. When was the last time you took the time to seek joy in your day? Sometimes we get so consumed that we forget to just stop and look and find joy. A minute. I can guarantee you'll find joy in a minute. Unless you're hanging out with me. You'll find it in 5 seconds. And thirdly, how are you letting God transform your heart into a state of joy? You see, the thing about my testimony was that I was so entrenched in bitterness for so long. And I did all these things and they helped. But it wasn't until I let God fully take control of my life and I let Him have my heart that I experienced the full joy that was on offer of a life of following Jesus. I'd held on for too long and I'd deprived myself of the joy that He wants us to have. It is the best thing you can do to let God transform you from the inside out and free your heart from the bitterness that can consume you.